One of the privileges of working at McKinsey is that you meet these amazing people. And here we have Kweilin. Your mother is from Guangzhou. You have an Irish-American father. You live in Nanjing, Shanghai, and now you're from Minneapolis. But welcome here. And I know that you just finished a research on gender equality around the world, but also in China, in the workplace.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about the research, and particularly in China, what did you find out?
Absolutely. As we look at gender equality around the world, what we see is there's a lot of room for improvement. And as we compare China to other countries around the world, China is actually quite good, particularly good at the early stages of the funnel. So college graduation rates for women in China, actually women earn the majority of college degrees, like in many countries around the world that are highly developed. Women are getting 57% of college degrees in China, same as is true in the US and the UK. Then when you enter the talent pipeline, kind of the early stages, the entry level of the workplace, women in China are also doing quite well. And that's true up until about the middle of the talent pipeline, kind of the vice president level and above. That's about 1/3 of vice presidents are women. And then it drops down to about 20%, or about 1 in 5 at that most senior level. So what we call the C-suite, or direct reports to the CEO. So on a relative basis, China is relatively equal on the front half of that talent pipeline, but then dropping off with quite a bit of room for improvement at the most senior levels of the talent
So
pipeline.
even at the senior level compared to Europe or the US, Chinese female executives are less represented at the C-suite.
They are less represented at the C-suite compared to many European countries and compared to the US, where it's more like 1 in 4. And one of the reasons for that may be because the retirement age for women in China is a bit lower than for men. And so just at the cusp where you're reaching these more senior levels, you've got 20, 30 years of experience. Many are eligible for retirement. Many are actually retiring, taking care of grandchildren, taking other paths. And so they're not actually staying in the workplace as long to compete for those most senior roles.
But that's really interesting, right? Because if you think about, as you said, right, the college graduation rates are, much more, higher, right? You think about even in China, right, where you have a lot of help at home, right, with, with children and all that. There's actually lots of conditions that would say that it should be actually much better than where it is right now in terms of when you get to the end of the funnel, as you pointed out.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of conditions that help. 3-generational households, other help and support. There are some challenges though, right? Societal expectations around the role and involvement of a mother, these retirement ages as we talked about, those all make it a bit more challenging. But at the same time, lots of bright spots, right? For example, China has one of the highest rates of female entrepreneurship. The majority, actually, of self-made female billionaires around the world come from China. So a lot of bright spots to point to as well.
And as you look around the world, right, just if we take this perspective a little bit broader, right, what are companies doing to help in this issue? What are some of the success cases you've seen, and maybe some lessons that we've seen that can be helpful for us?
Absolutely. We actually partnered with the World Economic Forum and did some research on what are the companies that are really moving the needle, what are they doing? And I think it'll come as no surprise to business leaders like yourself and many others that the companies that make the best progress treat gender equality like a business initiative. So they define what is the gap or the issue that they need to solve. They get the right resources against it, they drive the accountability, they resource appropriately, and then they track results and they measure very frequently, just as you would with any other business or growth initiative that you drive. And we find that the companies that do that get quite focused on, usually it's 1 or 2 things. It's not a broad spectrum of 10 initiatives that are going to help, but 1 or 2 things. That might be a sponsorship initiative, that might be kind of promotion rates and debiasing some of the process there. But usually it's 1 or 2 focused areas, and then they execute very systematically against that.
We come back a little bit to this societal cultural issues. You lived in China for many years. You also lived in the US and all that. What do you think are the main differences in terms of both at school but also in the workplace between, let's say, Chinese and American corporations?
so many differences. Where to start? So my 3 children went to a Chinese school, and I can say that Chinese schools are very much more set up for dual career households than in my experience at the U.S. school that my children now attend. So for example, school was 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. My 3 kids eat 3 meals a day at school. Either I or my mother can pick them up at the end of the day. That's very much geared towards dual career couples. In the U.S., it's quite different, right? School starts at 8:30 and it lasts till 3 o'clock, and so it's not very conducive to managing all of that and a career, much less an intense career. So that's one big difference. But let's maybe shift from kind of school and the personal realm to more of the workplace. I think in a Chinese context, seniority, kind of respect for elders, kind of tenure is very critical. I think that combined with this retirement age that we were talking about earlier is a pretty critical ceiling on that progression. One of the commonalities actually that we see across both is that women tend to, over time, have fewer P&L roles, right? They're not managing the biggest P&L or the biggest business unit or the second biggest business unit. They, over time, shift to more HR, finance, even IT or legal roles, and the support function roles that are very important, but they tend to lead to that CEO progression or promotion much less frequently. Mm-hmm. And so if we want to shift the CEO percentage of women, we need to shift also how many women are in that P&L, kind of that power alley of roles over time.
So basically you're saying that on the business unit ownership level, yes, you see a lot less women, but we see a lot more of them in the support function, in HR, in operations and all that.
Exactly. So if you look, for example, across Fortune 500 companies, every year between 99 and 100% of those Fortune 500 CEOs who are promoted from within are promoted from running that biggest P&L or the second biggest P&L. Almost never do you hear, our head of HR or even our CFO became our CEO. And so we need to shift what we call that staff role versus that line role mix.
Great. Well, look, from what I see lots of very promising signs in China, right? So many of my clients are actually led by women executives, and then even at McKinsey, in terms of our income and classes, yeah, right? I think that the women representation is actually highest in the world. So I think China actually has the conditions, right, to be absolutely leading the world, right, in this area. We just have to, maybe a few more shifts in the culture, maybe a few things about the retirement age, but we'll get there.
Indeed. I think there's so much that China can learn from the world can learn from China on these unlocks that will take us to that next level.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.